it wasn't always like this. For years, Emily and I had what people called a model marriage. We were the couple others envied, partners in every sense of the word. We shared dreams, supported each other through thick and thin, and always made time for date nights, no matter how hectic life became. But over the past year, something had shifted. It wasn't sudden, like a lightning strike. It was a slow erosion, the kind that sneaks up on you until one day, you're standing in a hollowed-out shell of what used to be solid ground. Emily was distant at first. I chalked it up to stress at work. Her promotion at Hartwell & Company, a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago, had brought new responsibilities, longer hours, and frequent after-hours meetings. She was glued to her phone more than ever, often typing furiously late into the night with a faint smile on her lips. "Just work stuff," she'd say when I asked what was so funny. I wanted to believe her. I tried to believe her. But then came the excuses, the "I'm too tired tonight" when I suggested we go out, the "let's do it another weekend" when I planned something special. Our conversations, once effortless, now felt forced, like pulling teeth to get her to engage. She stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped asking how my day was. I stopped mentioning it, tired of being dismissed. The final straw came on a Friday night. I'd planned a dinner for us at La Trattoria, her favorite Italian place downtown, where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays. It had been weeks since we'd spent any quality time together, and I was determined to remind her of what we still had. I even bought her flowers, yellow roses, her favorite. When she walked in the door that evening, her face lit up at the sight of the roses, but the moment was fleeting. "Oh, Michael," she said, placing the bouquet on the counter without taking a sniff. "These are beautiful, but I can't tonight." "Can't what?" I asked, confused. "Dinner. I forgot to tell you, I have to meet Daniel for a work thing. Last-minute project." Daniel. Her boss. I'd heard enough about him to know he was successful, charming, and single. I had no reason to distrust Emily, but the way she said his name made my skin crawl. It was casual, too casual, like she was trying not to draw attention to it. "Emily, it's Friday night. Can't this wait until Monday?" She sighed, annoyed. "Michael, this isn't just a social call. It's important. I promise we'll reschedule." She leaned in and kissed my cheek, but it felt more like a dismissal than affection. I wanted to argue, to demand why her work always seemed more important than us lately, but I didn't. Instead, I watched her go upstairs to change, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling in my chest. Something wasn't right. She came down half an hour later, wearing a sleek black dress I hadn't seen in years. It hugged her curves in all the right places, and her makeup was flawless, down to the bold red lipstick. She looked stunning, like the woman I'd fallen in love with. But she wasn't dressing up for me. "Don't wait up," she said with a breezy smile before grabbing her purse and walking out the door. As I stood there, the roses still sitting on the counter, a storm of emotions raged inside me: anger, hurt, confusion. I wanted to believe her, but a voice in my head kept whispering that this wasn't just about work. For the first time in our marriage, I wondered if Emily was keeping secrets from me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her laughing with Daniel, leaning in too close, brushing his arm. It was irrational, I had no proof of anything, but the unease gnawed at me. I thought about our wedding day, how she'd looked at me with such love and promise in her eyes. Was it possible that same woman was betraying me now? I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, the one who jumps to conclusions over nothing, but I also couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was slipping through my fingers. So, I decided I wouldn't confront her, not yet. I'd wait, watch, and see if my fears were real or just the product of an overactive imagination. Because if Emily was hiding something, I needed to know the truth. And if she wasn't, well, I'd find a way to fix whatever had broken between us. But deep down, I already knew, the woman I'd loved for so long was slipping away, and I wasn't sure if she even wanted me to hold on anymore. The next morning, Emily was back to her usual self, friendly but distant. She made small talk over coffee, telling me about the work dinner with Daniel as if it had been nothing more than a boring obligation. But her words felt rehearsed, too smooth, like she had practiced the story in her head before saying it out loud. "Daniel has some big ideas for the next quarter," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "This is going to mean a lot of late nights, but it'll pay off in the long run." I nodded, pretending to listen. In truth, I was already thinking about what I'd seen. She had come home much later than she usually did, and her demeanor had been off. She wasn't angry, tired, or even tipsy, she seemed exhilarated. The question swirled in my mind, had it been just dinner? Was I overthinking this, or was my gut trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear? That night, while Emily slept beside me, I decided I couldn't live with the uncertainty. I had to know the truth. I'd never been the type to snoop, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I reached for her phone on the nightstand, careful not to wake her. The screen was locked, but I'd seen her enter the code 100 times. My hands trembled as I typed it in. Once inside, I scrolled through her messages. Most of them were innocent, conversations with friends, work group chats. But then I found her thread with Daniel. My heart pounded as I opened it. The messages were worse than I had imagined. "Dinner was amazing last night. You always know how to make me laugh," she had texted him. "Only because I enjoy seeing you smile," Daniel had replied, followed by a winking emoji. My blood boiled as I read further. They joked, flirted, and referenced inside jokes I didn't recognize. Then there was a message from her, "I don't know what I'd do without you lately." That one hit me like a punch to the gut. I scrolled further back, searching for something definitive, when I found a photo Daniel had sent, a selfie of him in a suit, taken in what looked like a hotel room. The timestamp matched the night she'd cancelled our date. My hands clenched into fists. She'd been with him, not for a work dinner, but for something far more intimate. I put the phone back and lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls closing around me. I didn't wake her, didn't confront her, didn't demand answers. Instead, I let the anger simmer. I had my proof now, but I needed a plan. Bursting out in rage wouldn't fix this, it would only give her the upper hand. No, I needed to be smart about this. The next few days were a blur. Emily went about her routine as if nothing had happened, oblivious to the fact that I knew her secret. I played along, acting like the loving husband, all the while collecting more evidence. I tracked her location when she said she was working late and found her at restaurants and bars with Daniel. I took photos from a distance, documenting every moment. I even started recording our conversations, looking for inconsistencies in her stories. Every time she lied, it felt like a dagger to the heart, but I kept my composure. If she was going to betray me, I'd make sure there were consequences. One Friday night, she told me she'd be late again, another work dinner. I smiled and told her to have a good time, but as soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I kept my distance, careful not to be seen, until she pulled into a hotel parking lot. My stomach churned as I watched her walk inside, dressed to impress, her hair perfectly styled. I waited in the car for nearly an hour, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Then I went inside. The lobby was quiet, and the clerk barely looked up as I strolled toward the elevators. I didn't need to know which room was theirs, I just needed confirmation. I waited in the hallway, listening, until I heard her voice, laughing lightheartedly, the way she used to laugh with me. I walked away before I could do something reckless. It was all the proof I needed. My marriage was over, and Emily had no idea what was coming. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the evidence I'd gathered, photos, texts, voice recordings. All of it painted a clear picture of her betrayal. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. This woman, the one I had built a life with, had destroyed everything we had for a fling with her boss. But if she thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, she was dead wrong. My revenge wouldn't be impulsive or petty. It would be calculated, devastating, and final. I was done being the naive, trusting husband. Now, it was my turn to take control. I spent the next week strategizing. Revenge wasn't something to rush, it needed to be precise, planned, and, most importantly, satisfying. Confronting Emily in a fit of rage would accomplish nothing. She'd lie, gaslight me, or twist things to make herself the victim. No, I needed to dismantle her world methodically, piece by piece, and leave her with nothing but regret. The first step was understanding my position. While Emily was still unaware that I knew of her betrayal, I met with a lawyer. Mrs. Carter, a sharp attorney with a reputation for leaving no stone unturned, came highly recommended. Sitting in her office, I laid out everything, the texts, the photos, the recordings. "This is more than enough to prove infidelity," she said, flipping through the files I'd brought. "Given the circumstances, we can build a strong case for you to retain the majority of your marital assets. Do you have a prenuptial agreement?" I shook my head. "No prenup." She leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "That's fine. With the evidence you have, we'll make a strong argument for infidelity being the cause of the breakdown of the marriage. Does she know you're planning to leave her?" "Not yet," I said. "I want to make sure she doesn't see it coming." Mrs. Carter smirked. "Smart. Stay quiet, keep gathering evidence if you can, and start separating your finances discreetly. The more prepared you are, the harder it'll be for her to fight back when the time comes." Back home, I started implementing the plan. I opened a separate bank account in my name and began transferring small amounts of money from our joint account, nothing drastic, just enough that it wouldn't raise suspicion. I also made a list of everything valuable in the house, jewelry, electronics, artwork, and started quietly packing away items that were rightfully mine. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Emily's movements. She'd grown bolder in her affair, spending nights working late or going to networking events. I never confronted her, never gave her a reason to suspect that I was onto her. Instead, I played the role of the oblivious husband, even cooking her dinner when she came home late. But my patience was wearing thin. Every time I saw her smile at her phone or heard her laugh while texting, it felt like a slap in the face. She was living a double life, and I was the fool keeping the house running while she played with her boss. The second phase of my plan was more personal. Emily's reputation mattered to her. She thrived on being seen as the perfect professional, the perfect wife, the perfect everything. So, I started laying the groundwork to dismantle that facade. At work, I casually mentioned to my colleagues that Emily had been spending a lot of time with her boss. I framed it innocently, as though I were proud of her dedication, but the undertone was clear. "She's been working so hard lately," I'd say. "Dinner meetings, hotel conferences, you name it. Her boss must really appreciate her efforts." The rumors started spreading almost immediately. I heard snippets of gossip here and there, questions about whether Emily's dedication was entirely professional. I wasn't surprised when one of her mutual friends mentioned it to me. "I heard Emily's been working late with her boss a lot," Sarah, one of her closest friends, said over coffee one afternoon. "Is everything okay between you two?" I feigned confusion. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "No reason. Just, be careful, Michael." I nodded solemnly, pretending to appreciate her concern. Inwardly, I smiled. The seed was planted. The final piece of the puzzle was Daniel, her boss. I started digging into his background, social media profiles, news articles, even his LinkedIn. He had a sterling reputation as a rising star in the corporate world, but I knew that one scandal could bring it all crashing down. I compiled everything I could find and cross-referenced it with Emily's movements. Slowly, a pattern emerged. They weren't just meeting at random locations, they had a routine. A bar near his office on Thursdays, a hotel downtown on Fridays. With each new piece of evidence, my case against them grew stronger. I also discovered that Daniel's company had a strict policy against fraternization between employees and supervisors. If their affair became public knowledge, his career would be in jeopardy. It was a card I intended to play at the right time. One night, as Emily was getting ready for another work dinner, I couldn't help but watch her closely. She hummed to herself as she applied her makeup, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Have fun tonight," I said as she grabbed her purse. She turned to me, smiling. "Thanks, babe. I'll try not to be too late." As the door closed behind her, I took a deep breath. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, her lies would catch up with her, and she'd realize just how much damage she'd done, not just to me, but to herself. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking back control of my life and showing Emily that betrayal came with consequences. And when the time was right, I'd make sure she felt every ounce of the pain she had caused me. The night of my carefully orchestrated revenge arrived sooner than I expected. Emily had been so absorbed in her double life that she failed to notice the subtle changes around her, the dwindling joint account balance, the packed-away valuables, and the distant looks I gave her when she wasn't paying attention. To her, I was still the doting, oblivious husband who would never suspect a thing. That assumption would cost her dearly. It started with an invitation. Emily and I were scheduled to attend a cocktail party hosted by a mutual friend, Jessica. It was the kind of event we used to enjoy together, a chance to socialize and catch up with people we both cared about. But this time, I had ulterior motives. "Are you sure you want to go?" Emily asked, feigning concern as she adjusted her earrings. "I know you've been tired lately." Her concern felt like a mockery. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been a while since we've gone out together." She hesitated, as if weighing her options. I knew she was considering canceling, probably to find an excuse to meet Daniel instead, but the social pressure was too great. She agreed, reluctantly. The party was in full swing by the time we arrived. Laughter echoed through Jessica's elegant home, and glasses of wine clinked as old friends caught up. Emily slipped into her usual charm, smiling and chatting as if she had no care in the world. She was good at this, pretending everything was fine, even when it wasn't. I stayed close, not out of affection, but because I needed her in my line of sight when the moment came. My plan was simple: let her dig her own grave, and then hand her the shovel. As the evening progressed, I casually steered conversations toward her work. "Emily's been so dedicated lately," I mentioned to a group of friends. "Dinner meetings, late nights, her boss must really appreciate her efforts." A few people gave me odd looks, and I knew the wheels were turning. Rumors had already started circulating, but this was the final push they needed. It didn't take long for Jessica to pull me aside. "Michael, is everything okay with you and Emily?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. I gave her a pained smile. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Well, I've heard things about her and her boss." I didn't want to say anything, but people are starting to talk. This was exactly what I'd hoped for. "It's been a tough few months," I admitted, letting my voice break just enough to sell the act. "But I'm hoping tonight will help us reconnect." Jessica gave me a sympathetic look, and I knew I'd won her over. By the time the night was over, everyone would be on my side. Emily, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, laughed and mingled with our friends. I watched as she told some story about her office, probably involving Daniel. Her smile was bright, her laugh infectious, and for a moment, I felt a pang of regret. This was the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd married. But that version of Emily was gone, replaced by someone who thought so little of me that she could betray me without hesitation. It was time to act. I waited until the party was winding down, when the wine had loosened everyone's tongues and people were relaxed. Emily was standing in a group, chatting animatedly, when I stepped forward with my phone in hand. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but loud enough to draw attention. "I think it's time we talk about Daniel." The room went silent. Emily froze, her smile faltering. "Michael, what are you talking about?" I held up my phone, the screen displaying a photo of her and Daniel entering the hotel. "This," I said, my voice cold. "I've been wondering why you've been so distant lately." "Now I know." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily's face turned pale, and she stammered, "Michael, that's not, don't," I interrupted her. "Don't lie to me. I've got photos, messages, recordings. Do you want me to show everyone here, or should I email it to them later?" The humiliation on her face was immediate and brutal. She looked around, realizing that everyone was staring at her, whispering, judging. The friends who had once adored her were now watching her unravel. Daniel, who had the misfortune of attending the party, stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Michael, this is unnecessary," he said, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "Unnecessary?" I snapped. "You're sleeping with my wife, and you think I should keep quiet? Maybe your HR department would like to see this. Or better yet, your board of directors. I'm sure they'd be thrilled to know how you conduct business." Daniel's confidence crumbled. He stammered something unintelligible before backing away, leaving Emily to face the fallout alone. The rest of the night was a blur. Emily tried to talk to me, to explain, but I ignored her. I left the party without her, leaving her to deal with the aftermath of her humiliation. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing with messages from friends, all offering support and expressing their disbelief. I didn't respond to any of them. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. The mask Emily had worn for so long was finally shattered, and there was no hiding from the truth anymore. But this was just the beginning. She would feel the full weight of her betrayal soon enough. The morning after the party, Emily came home looking like a ghost. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and her eyes red from crying. She hadn't slept, probably spent the night replaying the humiliation over and over in her mind. Good, I thought. She deserved every second of it. "Michael," she said as she walked through the door, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." I didn't look up from my coffee. "About what? The lies? The betrayal? Or how you've been screwing your boss behind my back?" She flinched, as if the words physically hurt her. "This isn't what you think, stop," I snapped, slamming my mug onto the table. "Don't insult me by lying again. I've seen the photos, the texts. I've been watching you for weeks, Emily. You think I don't know what's been going on? You've treated me like a fool, and now you want to talk. Save it." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But it was quickly replaced by anger. She had brought this on herself, and no amount of tears would change that. Over the next few days, the fallout from the party began to spread. Our mutual friends were buzzing with gossip, and Emily's carefully curated reputation was unraveling. People who had once admired her were now whispering behind her back, questioning her character and loyalty. Even her closest friends began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Emily tried to salvage her relationships, sending out frantic texts and making tearful phone calls, but the damage was done. She had been exposed, not just as a cheater, but as someone willing to destroy her marriage for a fling. And Daniel, the man she had risked everything for, was nowhere to be found. Daniel's fallout was just as swift. The photos and evidence I had gathered found their way to his company's HR department, thanks to an anonymous email. Within days, rumors of his inappropriate relationship with Emily spread through his office. His supervisors, wary of a scandal, put him on administrative leave pending an investigation. Emily learned about this the hard way. She tried to call Daniel one evening, and I overheard the conversation from the other room. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, her voice strained. There was a long pause before he answered. "Emily, this isn't a good time." "What do you mean?" "We're in this together, aren't we?" "Look, I can't deal with this right now. I've got my own problems to handle. You should probably focus on fixing things with Michael." The call ended abruptly, and Emily sat there, staring at her phone in disbelief. I didn't need to say anything. The man she had risked everything for had abandoned her, leaving her to face the consequences alone. Meanwhile, I moved forward with the divorce. My lawyer, Mrs. Carter, worked quickly and efficiently, ensuring that I came out ahead in the settlement. Thanks to the evidence of Emily's infidelity, I retained the house, most of our shared assets, and custody of our dog, Max, who had always been more attached to me anyway. Emily, on the other hand, was left with little more than her clothes and her car. She fought back at first, begging me to reconsider. "Michael, please," she said one night, tears streaming down her face. "We can fix this. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes." But I shook my head. "You made your choice, Emily. You don't get to destroy our marriage and then ask me to fix it." Her pleas grew more desperate as reality sank in. She realized she had lost everything: her marriage, her friends, her reputation, and the man she had risked it all for. She was utterly alone, and for the first time, I saw her for what she really was, a broken, selfish person who had taken me for granted. As the weeks went on, Emily's life continued to spiral downward. She moved into a tiny apartment on the other side of town, far from the upscale neighborhood we had once called home. Her career suffered, too. Though she kept her job, her promotions became a distant dream. Every now and then, I'd hear from mutual friends about how she was doing. "She's struggling," one of them told me. "She says she misses you." I nodded, but I didn't feel sorry for her. This was the life she had chosen, and she had no one to blame but herself. One evening, Emily showed up at the house unannounced. She looked frail, like she hadn't eaten or slept properly in weeks. "Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What is it?" She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for any sign of forgiveness. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything. I just wanted you to know that I regret it. All of it." For a moment, I said nothing. Then I nodded. "Good. You should." Her face crumpled, and she turned to leave. I watched her walk away, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. She was finally beginning to understand the weight of her actions, but it was too little, too late. As the door closed behind her, I took a deep breath. The woman I had once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And though I didn't pity her, I hoped she would learn from this. Because I had no intention of ever looking back. In the months that followed, I began rebuilding my life, piece by piece. The house, once filled with painful memories, started to feel like mine again. I redecorated, getting rid of the things that reminded me of Emily, the painting we'd picked out together, even the bedding we'd shared. Each small change felt like reclaiming a part of myself. Emily, on the other hand, wasn't doing as well. The gossip about her affair had faded from the forefront, but her reputation was permanently tarnished. Mutual friends who once adored her now avoided her, uncomfortable with the scandal she'd created. Even her family, who had always been supportive, seemed distant. I'd heard through the grapevine that Daniel had completely cut her off after the HR investigation. He'd quietly resigned from his position and moved to another city, leaving Emily to deal with the fallout on her own. Without him to cling to, she had no choice but to face the reality of her choices. One afternoon, I received an email from Emily. The subject line simply read, "I'm sorry." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Michael, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and I don't blame you. I've spent every day since the divorce thinking about what I did and how much I hurt you. There's no excuse for my actions. I was selfish, careless, and I destroyed something beautiful. I see now that I had everything I could have ever wanted, a husband who loved me, a home full of happiness, and a future filled with possibilities. And I threw it all away. I just wanted you to know that I regret everything. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it. I hope you found peace, even if it means never forgiving me. Emily." I stared at the email for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply, to tell her that her regrets didn't matter now, that the damage was already done. But another part of me felt nothing. Her apology didn't stir anger or sadness in me. It didn't feel like closure. Closure had come long before, when I made the decision to walk away and never look back. I deleted the email without replying. The divorce had left me financially stable, thanks to the evidence I'd gathered and the smart decisions I'd made. I used the extra money to pursue hobbies I'd put on hold during my marriage. I took up woodworking, something I'd always been interested in but never had time for. My weekends became a time of creation, carving and crafting furniture that would fill my home with new memories. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, people I'd subtly pushed away because they didn't fit Emily's image of what our social circle should be. It felt good to laugh again, to share stories and beers without the weight of Emily's judgment hanging over me. One day, while walking Max in the park, I struck up a conversation with Claire. She was sitting on a bench, sketching a tree in a notebook, and Max, ever the friendly dog, had wandered over to investigate. "Sorry about him," I said, smiling as I approached. "He's too curious for his own good." She laughed, scratching Max behind the ears. "No need to apologize. He's adorable." We talked for a while, about her art, about my woodworking, about how neither of us had expected to be in this park on this particular day. There was something easy about our conversation, something I hadn't felt in years. When she asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, I didn't hesitate. Claire wasn't Emily. She was warm and genuine, with no pretense or ulterior motives. As we got to know each other, I realized how much I had settled in my marriage. With Claire, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself or compete for her attention. She valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide or how I made her look. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something better, hope. Hope that I could rebuild, that I could find happiness again, that the betrayal that had once consumed me no longer defined me. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with Max at my feet and a glass of bourbon in hand, I thought about Emily, not with anger or bitterness, but with acceptance. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. And while her life seemed to be unraveling, I had found a way to move forward. The stars overhead were bright, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. Emily would always carry the weight of her actions, but I wouldn't let her choices weigh me down anymore. I had found my closure, not in revenge or in her suffering, but in rediscovering who I was without her. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all.